Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Hollowed. Sit back and relax and get ready to enjoy some spine-tingling stories about people's most unexplainable moments of their lives. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
This happened when I was 11. I'm now 26. I was at school one day and had planned to go to my friend Tom's house afterwards. But this day I got a message that I needed to go to the school administration office. They told me to call my mom. So, realizing this was very unusual, I called her using the office phone. She said I needed to come straight home after school. I knew she was being weird. I went home, and my older brother was playing Sims. He was very quiet and didn't make eye contact with me when I said hello. I said Mom had called and that I couldn't go to Tom's house. And then, for some reason that I will never be able to explain for the rest of my life, I said I think it might have something to do with Pat, my mom's best friend and second mom to me. My brother didn't respond, he was still playing Sims, and I just went downstairs. I had shrugged off my intuition, thinking it was just me being weird. About an hour later, my mom came home, took me into the kitchen, and told me Pat had died from a heart attack that morning. This lady had helped raise me. To this day, I have no idea how or why I knew something was wrong with Pat. There was no knowledge of her being sick or somehow nearly dying. I just said something completely random that turned out to be true. I know there's something to be said for mother's instincts. But that day makes me wonder if there's such a thing as a child's instinct. True story. When my dad was a kid, my grandparents adopted a ton of pets, mostly dogs and cats. Over the years, most of them got old and died. By the time I was born, they only had a few cats and a dog, which were quite old. When I was a young child, I would play with the dog and attempt to pet the cats. I remember petting a tabby cat that was quite friendly, getting scratched by a big gray and fluffy cat whom I called Smokey, but he wasn't actually named Smokey. I just called him that because he looked like a puff of smoke, and if I was quiet and patient enough, occasionally getting to pet a black and white cat. Years went by, the dog and cats eventually died as well, and my grandparents moved to another house. One night over dinner, my sister was asking my dad questions about the pets he had as a kid. He listed a ridiculous amount, told us to never have more than one cat at a time, then asked us if we remembered any of them that were still alive when we were kids. My brother and sister shook their heads and only mentioned remembering the dog. The dog did outlive the cats by about a decade. I nodded my head and then began listing the cats. When I mentioned the grumpy gray cat and the friendly tabby cat, my parents nodded their heads. But when I told him about the black and white cat, my dad frowned and looked at my mom. Then he said, "Tyrone died before you were born." Background first, right after I turned 16, my family moved from a big city on the coast to a medium-sized town. At the time I thought it was small. I have since been educated, in the middle of the country and into an over 100-year-old house that had been vacant for over a year. There are lots of crazy fitting stories I could tell you, but I'll stick to the worst one that happened to me, and I'll add another that happened years later to my son and nephew. We had been there for just over a year, it was spring, and we get crazy thunderstorms where I live. So I'm alone in our attic, which had just finished being remodeled from its original 100-year-old form. We have 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, a sitting area, and a loft over the 2 original bedrooms, with a ladder going up to them. I was on the couch watching TV. It's just past midnight, the storm is getting pretty bad, and the house is moving a bit, but that's all normal. Suddenly, the lights flicker, and the loft light turns on and turns off. Okay, maybe I just imagined that. It could be lightning, whatever, just chill. Then, I swear, something just moved on the glass-top coffee table. I'm looking at all the little plastic cups my baby sister had been playing tea with, surrounding my empty plastic restaurant cup, you know, the heavier textured kind they use at cheap chain places. Suddenly, my cup slowly starts sliding across the table, weaving in and out of all the little toy cups. Just as it reached the edge, my hand shot out instinctively and caught the cup as it fell off. I looked at it in my hand for a second, then slammed it back down onto the center of the table and stood up. The lightning at this point is crazy, and I can't hear the TV over the constant thunder. I am standing there frozen, trying to think if that really just happened when the cup just went flying across the table so hard and fast that it flew the 5 feet across the rest of the room into my sister's bedroom door. I scream, and my sister comes flying out of her room, asking what the hell I'm doing, throwing crap at her door. I told her it wasn't me, the cup just flew by itself. She stared at me for a second and then told me to shut up and go back to bed. She even locked her door. I start banging on her door, asking her to let me in to sleep with her, and she just wraps herself tighter in her blanket and yells a muffled "go to bed." I slept with all my lights on and totally wrapped in blankets. I didn't even sleep much, but I sure kept my eyes clamped shut and my head covered like the damn boogeyman was after me. Story 2, my son and nephew were 2 and 3, respectively. The house is all closed off with a door between every room. The entrance has a huge stairway leading upstairs, a huge wooden thing with a scary grate about 2 feet tall for the ancient air system. So I'm at work, it's the middle of the day, and my mom is watching my kid and my sister's kid, and a couple of my younger sisters are there in the living room with her. The pocket doors are all closed, and the regular door between the living room and entry is only open a couple inches. The boys were playing some sword game in the entryway since it's the most open area in the house and the only place without ground level stuff for them to bash into. Suddenly, my son screams bloody murder, and they hear a loud thunk at the same time. My son comes running into the room, smashing the door open into the wall, and crying hysterically. My sisters run out into the entryway to get my nephew, thinking something must have happened to him. Nope. He had dropped onto the floor, the thunk, and curled into a ball, laying face down, patting the top of his head. He pats his head or rubs his hair when he's super upset about anything, and just shaking. When asked about it, my nephew wouldn't speak, he would just shake his head and pat his hair. My son finally calmed down enough to tell them that a man with a scary face appeared on the stairs. He wore dark clothes and had a horrible face. That's all he would say about it, and my nephew still won't say anything. Neither will talk about it anymore. Since then, my son, who loved Halloween and scary masks and haunted houses before that, will no longer be alone in that house. He screams if you try to leave him in the entryway, and he no longer likes anything scary. He couldn't even watch his favorite movie, The Nightmare Before Christmas, for months afterwards. He's almost 4 now and is getting better, but he still gets upset if you ask him about it. I was about 8, and I felt partially off the back of some bleachers once. I was holding on for dear life while the people above me were trying to help me up. But not at first. I was dangling and screaming for a minute before the people up there heard me. Also, being around my age, they didn't really know how to pull me up or help me down. We struggled for whole minutes, at least 15, until I managed to get a foothold and climb up. When I came down later, I saw a cross, and it dawned on me that the other bleachers were facing me. Over 200 or more people had seen me dangling there and doing nothing. I actually went into the other bleachers later on and confirmed it. I was perfectly visible. Over 200 people had seen me as an 8-year-old hanging from about 25 feet and had done nothing. I just sat there in the empty bleachers for a long time, staring at where I had been. I felt very afraid and very alone. When I was 11, I stayed with my friend and his mom for a week. They lived in a small town about 2 hours from where I lived. On the last night, he fell asleep in the living room on the couch, so I went to his room to crash on the floor. We left the TV on, so the living room area had that TV blue glow. I had a hard time sleeping when I saw a tall, dark figure walk into the bathroom and close the door. I hear the tap turn on and off a couple times, and then the toilet seat lifts and drops. I knocked on the door, thinking it was my friend, and I was going to see if he was okay, but there was no answer, so I knocked on his mom's bedroom door and told her that her son was in the bathroom and he might be sick. She went to the bathroom, opened the door, and nobody was inside, and my friend was still sound asleep in the living room. It still gives me chills today. I've always lived in the city. My parents bought 11 acres out in the country. No street lights, just houses and land, tons of it. The first month the house was built and we were staying in it, I was in my room on my computer, just like I am now. I hear a knock on the door at 3 to 4 a.m. I'm always up late. No one is ever awake at that time besides me. I open the door, and no one is there. I walk around the house a bit and still don't see anything or anyone. I don't think much of it. The next day, I ask my parents and sisters if they knocked on the door, and of course they said they didn't. So my sisters are scared shitless now. I tell them maybe it was nothing and I just thought I heard a knock. About a week or two after it happened again, around the same time. I opened the door, and there was still nothing around. This time, I'm more scared because I know it's happened before. I still walk around and see nothing. We've been in this house for a year now, and it hasn't happened since. Never found an explanation, we're just glad it's not happening anymore. In the 6th grade, my friend and I were getting into mischief and throwing snowballs at cars after school one day. It was about 5 p.m., and we were throwing them from a catwalk or alleyway that was about 50 or 60 yards away from his house. The alleyway overlooks a main road going through my town from about 80 feet above. The cars were lined up in traffic, about 50 cars deep, at a red light. We each hit the same car, one that was near the back of the line. We then turned around and ran full speed back to his house. As we were walking up his driveway, the stop sign intersection at the end of his street came into view, about another 50 yards away. The car that we hit was turning onto the street and speeding towards us. This, as far as my friend and I can figure it out, is impossible. The distance he had to travel just to make it to his intersection was about 45 cars, moving slowly on a wet and snowy evening. He then would have had to turn right, drive about half a mile up a hill, turn right into a subdivision, and then turn right, left, and right again at various intersections just to make it to my friend's street. The distance he traveled at the same time we sprinted 50 or 60 yards just makes absolutely no sense. And this is all provided he knew where to go, and my friend says he's not a neighbor, nor did he ever see him there again after years of living there. We ran inside his house and hid behind some couches in the living room, peering through the curtains to see if he had spotted us on our way into the house. Sure enough, he had. A really tall, but otherwise normal-looking guy from what I remember got out and ran to the front door, and immediately began pounding on the door, demanding that we come outside. We hoped he would just leave, but at that moment, my friend's mom came home from work early and saw this stranger parked in her driveway, pounding on her door. She got out of the car, and we could see them yelling at each other. She demanded we come outside and give her an explanation. This man said you threw snowballs at his car, what do you have to say? We were terrified, so we lied. We denied throwing any snowballs whatsoever. Cowardly, I know. But we were kids, and this guy was scaring the hell out of us. Eventually, my friend's mom asked him to describe the color of our jackets, which he did incorrectly. He then argued that we threw the snowballs from a completely different location from where we actually did. Like, from the bottom of the hill on the road. It made absolutely no sense at all. We focused our denial and lies on those two truths. We were wearing blue jackets, not red, and we were on the catwalk, not the road down below. Eventually he left, and we miraculously didn't get into too much trouble. I think my friend's mom knew we had done something, but seeing how passionately we denied parts of his story, I think she thought other kids were involved. We didn't see anybody else and had an absolutely clear view of everything from above. My friend and I still talk about it to this day. How on earth did he find us so fast, and why didn't his explanation make any sense? I would even be willing to concede that somehow, there were other kids throwing snowballs at cars at the exact same time that we didn't see, even though I'm sure that didn't happen. But we cannot explain how the car made the drive to my friend's street so fast. It still baffles us both. When I was a kid, I woke up in the middle of the night crying and upset, so I went to find my mom. When she asked what was wrong, I told her something bad happened to our family, and when she tried to figure out who it was, I told her not us but our extended family. I told her our neighbors and best friends at the time were who I was talking about. She told me that everything was going to be fine and sent me to bed. My best friend is adopted, and his biological father, whom I've never met and who lived in a different state, passed away in his sleep that night, which we learned the day after. I bought a house on the edge of town in a subdivision next to open fields. About 1 week in, clear night, wife and child are asleep, I'm reading Reddit, and there was a very loud thunderclap, what I would imagine a large artillery gun on an old battleship sounding like. A split second later, a shockwave hit the house, rattled windows, set off some car alarms, and scared the fuck out of my wife, along with everyone else in the neighborhood. I've experienced a microburst before, and this wasn't that. Also, there were no clouds in the night sky. There were physical signs of the shockwave, like broken windows, etc., but no evidence of what caused it. The neighbors still talk about it, but nobody to this day knows what went down. I came home late one night with no keys to let myself in and nobody was home. I didn't know this at the time. We have a driveway down the side of my house that is pitch black at night, and I have always avoided it at all costs, so anytime I knock on the front door, there is no answer, so I knock again harder this time, and from down the driveway, I hear a young girl's voice say, "What's wrong, posh smotatoes?" The voice alone set me on edge immediately. There was something about it that didn't sound right, but regardless, I asked who was there. Obviously, I didn't get a reply, and before I knew it, I was screaming at the top of my lungs. Neighbors came out to look for a girl I knew wasn't there. I didn't sleep for a month after that, hands down the most unsettling thing to happen to me. The same voice has been heard many times since then in and around my house. My dad genuinely thought I was crazy until he heard it saying his name as well. I've never seen him look so on edge. It was the night before I left to study abroad in Holland. I was driving around my hometown, listening to my favorite music, and saying goodbye for now to my hometown. It was raining with small amounts of isolated thunder and lightning. I was so calm. I was at peace. I felt prepared for my coming journey. It's funny, I still remember thinking about how great it was to drive in this weather. I pull up to a stop sign in front of a grand church with a giant oak tree in the front. Then I hear an ear-splitting boom. The hairs on my arm stand up. I hear a cracking sound. I look out the passenger side window, and I see the giant oak tree falling directly towards my car. I have a convertible. Although the top was not down at the time, I was sure death was a second away. I speed away as fast as I can, but it still manages to hit the back of my car. I'm spared. My car, not so much. When I was really young, I must have been under 4 or 5 years old, my family took a trip, and I think it was somewhere in the Middle East. That's my guess, because the men I remember were wearing white robes with a red, checkered scarf around their heads. One minute I'm frolicking beside a beach, zigzag around palm trees. The next minute, a man grabs me and carries me over to his group of 15 or 20 friends. They line up in 2 rows, with the second one kneeling because we're taking a picture. They try to make me smile for the camera by making weird faces and squishing mine, but I'm screaming because I just want to run back to my parents. I was separated from them by perhaps 15 feet at most, but I don't know if I've panicked that hard ever again in my life. They let me go immediately after the picture was taken. I went out drinking with a bunch of friends to our local bar, about 2 miles from my house. I started taking shots at 9 p.m. or so. At 1:30 or so, my friends lost track of me when they were arranging rides for the worst of us. I don't remember anything from 11 o'clock until 7 a.m. when I woke up naked in my garage in my car. My phone, dead battery, wallet, and keys were on the driver's side floor. There was dried blood on me, and I didn't have any wounds. There was no damage to my car, and no one said I was talking to anyone outside our group all night. No one was reported missing for at least a week, and there were no police reports of any assaults or accidents. My clothes never turned up anywhere. It's been several years, and the only thing that has come of it is that I don't take shots anymore. My best friend and her boyfriend died in a car accident when we were teenagers. I spent the day and night at our other friend's house. We were the 3 musketeers from kindergarten to senior year, so it was pretty rough, and I remember pretty much crying constantly. I finally managed to cry myself to sleep. I wake up in the early morning, totally panicked that I wasn't crying, and therefore, I wasn't grieving. And I suddenly sensed that my dead best friend was sitting on the bed next to me, and I heard her voice in my head telling me, "Stop being such a fucking loser, it's okay not to cry. Everything will be okay." So, I'm lying there, quietly freaking out, and my other friend, who is in the other bed on the other side of the room and who I think is sound asleep, suddenly says everything will be okay. And then we both go back to sleep. I wake up in the morning and realize that this all happened pretty much 24 hours after her death. And the friend across the room had the exact same experience, that she woke up sensing that our dead friend was on the bed with her and saying goodbye. We spoke of it once, that next morning, and never again. I once had a balloon. After several weeks, it had deflated enough to just sit in the middle of the room, at about handheld height. At this point, we started telling my little sister it was being held by Joanna the ghost. A bit of backstory about Joanna. When I was stripping the wallpaper from my bedroom a couple of months before this incident, we found a lot of blood on the walls, leading from the window and, weirdly, to the attic. This was never explained. A well-timed Sweeney Todd song on my iPod led to the resulting ghost being named Joanna. Then, the balloon began to move. It would track around the room, following the path from the window to the attic to the door, continuously. It did this for days and was put down to convection currents. A very reasonable explanation. Convection currents was also the excuse we used when Mom found the balloon under her desk. We put it back into the room and then watched as it traced its way, beautifully at the right height to be held by a small child, out the bedroom, across the landing, down the stairs, through the hall, through the lounge, to the far end, where it tucked itself under the desk. Watched by my entire family. Mum just popped the balloon and told us off for a trick she or we didn't understand how we could do. My 8-year-old sister couldn't sleep for days, as now we didn't know where Joanna was. We have never been allowed a helium balloon since. Another fun fact, before she even started floating around the room, my dog came into my bedroom one day and refused to enter, growling at the balloon. This was probably a natural dog reaction to an unexplained magical floating ball. Also, none of us believed, or still quite believe, in ghosts. But I have never found another excuse for this bizarre behavior, other than some very precise convection currents and the balloon being just at the optimum density to float in the Goldilocks zone. Years ago, I moved into a relatively new apartment complex on the edge of gigantic city. On 2 sides of the property, it was still wood. Weird shit happened while I lived there. So mostly I heard weird sounds and stuff inside, but I figured that was normal for apartments. The laundry room door wouldn't stay closed. Would pop open randomly. There was no way to pull it open once closed without turning the knob, but the door would open on its own. I would also wake up at night and find all the lights in the common areas on, all but in the 2 bedrooms. Anyway, one day I came home, and, as a girl who grew up in gigantic city is apt to do, I habitually bolted the door behind me as usual. My husband was at work and had just dropped kids off at a friend's house, so I was alone. As I crossed the living room to my bedroom, I saw in the reflection of some wall pictures a man walk behind me, kind of perpendicular to my path. Tall, cowboy hat, white guy. I spun around, no one was there. Fucking yikes. I told my friend about it, and she said I should talk to her mom. I talked to her mom, who said her friend was the victim of a serial killer, and when caught, the killer reported burying 10 bodies in a particular bit of wood on the edge of gigantic city, but only 7 bodies were ever recovered. She had obsessively followed the case in the papers because of her friend. That woods? Right where our apartment complex had been built, part of the woods freshly cleared for that purpose, 3 years earlier. So, I had a football coach back in high school who was also one of my teachers for a semester. He told us one story that freaked us all out pretty badly. He had a coaching job at a small college in Montana when he was a lot younger and newly married. He said that after practice one evening, he was making his long commute home, and the route ran alongside just fields and fields of hay, grain, whatever. Since it was late summer or early fall, it wasn't even approaching dark yet. His car was an old beat-up truck with just a bench seat. Anyway, he's driving along when he sees a hitchhiker on the shoulder. This being back in the day and in small-town Montana, my teacher pulled over to let the guy in without a second thought. The man was described as wearing a really old, outdated style of suit. Not quite a zoot suit, but styled in a similar, baggy way. He also had a big, stylish hat. This guy looked like he was out of his 40s and sort of like a pimp. My teacher thought it was weird that he was so overdressed for being so hot out. But maybe that was the only clothing he had. So the guy gets in next to my teacher without saying a word. The teacher asks him where he needs to go, and the guy just points forward. The teacher drives on. Later, my teacher tried talking to the guy, just trying to make a simple conversation, but the guy wouldn't speak or even acknowledge him. He just pulled his hat down, like he was sleeping. Out of nowhere, the guy just tips up his hat, looks out the window, and says, "Stop the car, now." My teacher pulls over and lets him out, not wanting to offend a possibly crazy man. The guy stands on the side of the road for a second, and then, at a dead sprint, just runs off into the field beside the road, until my teacher couldn't see him anymore. Granted, the crop was fairly tall. He waits there for a while, thinking maybe the guy had the runs or something and didn't want to shit next to the road. After a long enough wait, my teacher gets back in the truck and starts to accelerate back onto the road. The thing about really old trucks is that they don't accelerate very fast. As my teacher got back on the road, he looked in his rearview mirror to check for a safe merge. But there wasn't a car in sight. What there was the hitchhiker, on all fours like an animal, running, crawling, after the truck at an inhuman speed. Meanwhile, my teacher is beginning to fishtail as he attempts to go faster. The whole time, his eyes were glued to the mirror, watching the man chase after his car. Eventually, he was able to get up to speed and lost sight of the guy in his mirror. When he was able to stop at a gas station to use a pay phone, he called his wife at home to tell her the story and to lock up the house. She thinks he's just messing with her, and he had been talking to her coworker about the hitchhiker. When he asks why she would think that, apparently at her office in the town she worked in, one of her coworkers told her a story of the exact same thing happening to them, and it is a well-known urban legend in that town. She thought it was just folks playing with the new girl at work, who had to drive home alone at night. Anyways, my teacher assured her that he was not lying, and she evidently believes him and can vouch for her side of the story because she showed up to one of our fundraisers and I asked her about it. So yeah, now I just avoid lonely roads in Montana.